What's going on, everybody? It is time for a new season, of blunt force discussion. We have got what I like to call liberal Barry or Barry Klinger on the show. I am Anthony Russo, your host of Blunt Force Discussion. We're going to have a little dose of fun on this episode because we actually get to have a debate with somebody that is willing to have a conversation that is from the left. And I'm going to start this episode out by saying, let's be kind in the comments. You can show disagreement. You can say, how can you think that way because of XYZ? I don't love the idea of anybody just saying, because I know that probably a lot of people watching have similar thought processes that I do. And I would just ask that we be kind and respectful of that. And that we realize that if you're going to make somebody think differently, then you say why you think differently. And let's start from that aspect. Little how I know Barry. Barry got in my comments. I actually don't remember what mutual friend we have, but we got into it on Facebook in a very peaceful way where we really, really disagreed with each other. I enjoyed having these discussions with Barry on Facebook because he never got personal. A couple times we would do the whole like, really, really? But for the most part, he had his reasons to feel a certain way. He stood by them, and we had respectful dialogue. So I don't know a ton about Barry. That's the great part about this episode is we are going to have a conversation just like anybody would when they get to know somebody from a different ilk, from a different thought process. And we're going to try to test each other's truths and why and logic. And we're going to go back and forth from that level. So I encourage you guys to share this episode out there. Please help the algorithm. Say where you're from in the comments. And also, I'm going to go ahead and throw up just the basics of Great American Syndicate. As always, if you like the gear, go to awakenotwokestore.com. Use Awake for 15% off. And we've talked a lot about the Great American Syndicate, which is about patriots and people that are business-minded that just want to work with like-minded people or people that truly love our country. So I'll keep that in the bottom. That's where you find that. Also check out, of course, the Instagram page of Truth Will Set You Free USA or Blunt Force Discussion. That's it. If you're on the YouTube, please subscribe as we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on the Blunt Force Discussion YouTube. Okay, without further ado, it's time to start the show. This is a digital edition. This is the first time we have done a live blunt force discussion, so I'm pretty excited about it, and let's get the show started. And without further ado, we've got our guest, Barry Klinger. What's going on, Barry? How you doing?
What, did you say this is live? I didn't know it was live. No, just kidding.
Like you're attacked. You came after me. Barry, introduce yourself to everybody. Tell everybody who you are. I honestly don't even know what you do for a living, any of that stuff. So let's start there.
Yeah, well, I'm a physical oceanographer, which means I study how ocean currents work, things like the Gulf Stream. I started off in physics and kind of wanted to study other planets and decided that our planet was pretty interesting to study. I'm a professor at George Mason University, which is a state school right outside of DC in Virginia. Actually known kind of for being a hub of conservative thought, but maybe not so much in the science departments. I'm in the atmospheric, oceanic, earth sciences department there. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about climate change because I know a little bit about it. And I teach it at a graduate level. I've done a little bit of research connected to it also. Yeah, I am liberal Barry, but I'm also scientist Barry. So I like to think that if logic and evidence contradict something I believe, I should change what I believe. That's part of what I like about having these debates, even from people that I think are mostly wrong. They usually say some things that are right, and I learn things I didn't know. And my goal is if somebody on the other side thinks I'm wrong, but at least I'm not, they don't think I'm a total asshole, that's probably progress from what they thought before they talked to me. So that's what I'm often hoping for in these discussions. I really appreciate that you're trying to reach across kind of the partisan divide in these kind of things.
Barry, I've been trying. So in the very beginning of Truth Will Set You Free and Be the Change, we had consistency with some people from the opposite side of the argument. And then over the last year and a half, it has been very hard to have conversations. So I know you and I have talked about doing this for a while, but I had a lot of stuff. And finally, I'm like, I'm available. You are available. And we're going to make it happen. And I I do like the fact that you come from the academia field, because I think a lot of people they essentially poo-poo the concept of academia at this point because they're like, oh, it's so woke, it's so liberal. I do still think there is a purpose to universities, and I'm curious to get into the climate change argument, and maybe this, we're going to really talk about climate change to start. We're probably going to end on 2020, 2021 election, all the different stuff, election denying, and that. And if we go past it, I think part of the conversation might lend towards our opinion on vaccines, which I'd be curious on yours at one point, but that'll be bonus if we get to that point. So you teach essentially about climate change, and there's a lot
One
of
of the things I teach, yeah.
It's one of the things you teach. So you've got people that obviously they're willing to listen. So that is a very, very, very good start. One of the topics being climate change is one of the most divisive things in this country. There's people that believe there's no such thing as climate change. There's people that believe it's going to be the end of the world. You have done a lot of statistical models. Now I know why you have, because I've looked at a lot of your pages. We've even gone at it a couple of times on some of those comments where I said, well, your data doesn't really prove to me anything is out of the ordinary except for minor blips. So what is your opinion on the state of climate change in this country, in this world? Sorry, universe, whatever.
So I want to circle back to that question, but I want to say a little bit more about my background, because I think, to me, the really sad and frankly dangerous thing about this whole debate is this demonization of people that you don't know. And so I want to go back and talk about how I started off as I was like that nerdy kid that everybody knows in school, that I was really into the space program, into Star Trek, studied physics, taught myself some physics I spent a summer reading physics textbook when I was a kid, just because I thought that was really cool. Went to MIT and got a physics degree, was studying astrophysics, and thought, it probably doesn't really help anyone if I learn something new about neutron stars, even though they're cool. So I kind of changed direction, looking for a change of direction. Ended up on physical oceanography, right before climate change became a big topic of discussion. Most of my work is not on climate change. I actually wrote a whole textbook on physical oceanography about how ocean circulates, and there's very little mention of climate change in that. I work at a lab called Center for Ocean, Land, Atmosphere Studies, COLA, at George Mason. The bread and butter of this lab has been stuff like El Nino, natural variability, nothing to do with climate change, but also climate. So I just want people to understand that it's not like I spent my life, hoping to find a way to make everybody get into electric cars. You know? So, and I think that's typical of everybody in this field. We're all a bunch of nerdy guys, and guys, including women, that just like science.
Your woke followers, make sure you knock out all the genders.
Yeah. Right. So these and if you look at the people that developed the ideas about global warming, a big guy that I know a little bit is Suki Manabe. He had a job at a government lab. He would be a famous scientist even if there's no global warming. He kind of invented climate modeling in a way. He was one of the main guys that combined ocean models and atmospheric models, and has done some of the seminal work on climate change. He would have been fine. He didn't need to make a buck on climate change. It was an interesting problem to him, and he thought it was something important, and so he worked on it, and that's really typical. So, and I'm bringing all this up because I think that a lot of my conversations kind of go back to, even I'll go back and forth with someone, and I've literally had people say to me, well, I can't explain why I'm right and you're wrong, but I know you're wrong because you guys are all wrong. And I think it just shows a level of distrust that I think is, sometimes you have reasons to distrust people, but I don't think the scientific community has really earned that distrust and hatred that I'm feeling in some quarters. So I kind of wanted to put that out there as, kind of why I think this is an interesting topic to debate, because that lack of trust now is permeating everything in our society between, blue and red. And
just ask the question. I'm assuming you are a Democrat. You are more on the liberal voting side. Have you ever voted Republican for anything, or is that
yes.
You have? Okay, interesting.
Yes. By the way, I was brought up by a dad that was really into Ayn Rand. I read the Atlas Shrugged when I was like in junior high, so and I don't agree with a lot of it, but I think I understand, the attraction of some ideas, libertarian ideas and conservative ideas on the right. The one time I voted Republican, I think about this a lot. I thought about this a lot when Trump came along. There was a Democrat running for governor in Massachusetts named John Silber, who I thought was kind of nuts. He just seemed very extreme. He wasn't that left wing. He was actually kind of right wing in some ways, but kind of traditional Democrat in other ways. But I just thought, he was a little bit dangerous. And the guy that was running against him was a guy named Bill Weld, who you might have heard of, became Libertarian candidate for president later. But he was governor of Massachusetts, and he won because a lot of Democrats thought that Silber was nuts. And so, I didn't agree with a lot of Weld's policies, but I thought I'd rather have someone I disagree with than someone that's nuts. And I think, one of the things I found was a little bit of surprise that I could understand people voting for, conservatives. Maybe we'll get into this more in the second half, but, I thought that it was I thought that Republicans didn't have the reaction that I expected them to have at certain junctures, dealing with issues I thought weren't really right left. It was more like just how you behave in office. But I'm happy to say I'm a liberal. I mean, I definitely own that, and my political instincts are generally liberal.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's start talking just in terms of the climate change and why that. I think that is one of your you as much as you don't research it as much as some of the other oceanography stuff, you do a lot of research on it, and you're a big believer that we need to save the universe, save the planet, all these different things. So when you look at a Republican that disagrees that the climate is one of the biggest issues, or Paris Climate Accord and all these different things, what is your response to the people that think the Paris Climate Accord is BS and that really climate has been changing forever? Why is it all of a sudden this big issue right now?
So being a scientist, I like to analyze things, and I'm going to pull this apart a little bit. I think there's several levels and different aspects of the question. There's, more or less room for disagreement. So like at the base, there's kind of climate science. Are we changing the atmosphere? Yes, there's no question about that. We're pumping lots of CO2 and other stuff into the atmosphere. You can measure it. It's indisputably a big change in the atmosphere compared to what's happened for thousands of years. If you go back, millions of years, you can find other episodes that were similar, but over, the course of civilization, that's new. There's the question of what that does. And there's, it's pretty much indisputable now that the Earth has warmed up over the last 30, 40 years. And I'd say it's basically established now that adding CO2 warms the Earth.
So you said the last 30 to 40 years. I think that's an important statement. We're talking in the last million, the universe, the world been around for hundreds of thousands, millions, depending on what school of thought, a long, long time. So 30 to 40 years, how, as a scientist, can you say that is a sample size that can be deemed as accurate and not a blip in terms of a much larger ratio?
So you're saying that just looking at 30 years, you can't tell that something new is happening?
Correct.
I 100% agree with you.
Okay.
And so the interesting thing about climate change is that before we really had much evidence, we had the idea. So there's a hypothesis. People talk about back in the 70s, there were some newspaper articles about maybe the ice age is coming. So there were some hypotheses floating around. One was that maybe we're due for the next ice age. One was that maybe pumping CO2 because of basic laws of physics would warm up the planet. And when people looked more into the ice age hypothesis, they found more and more evidence that it wasn't true, that the natural cycles of the Earth should bring us into an ice age eventually, but not doing it now. But there's more and more evidence that the kind of things that we're doing to the atmosphere should warm up the Earth. And in fact, looking, this was predictions made back in the 70s, in the 40 years since then, has warmed up the Earth. So that's really the combination
So that
of
so those numbers have shown that to be absolutely true. Could not agree more that the climate has increased in the last 40 years as predicted. Now, all the dire circumstances that were predicted to go with that raising of the levels of water, massive, storms, flooding, acid rain. Well, acid rain has increased a bit, but there's all these predictions that came along with the temperature going up that have not happened in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So I think that so here's someplace where, first of all, we need to separate what the best science says and what the media says, because you could find an article that says something that's wrong, and I do believe there's been some alarmist press that has exaggerated, what the risks are and what the harms are. The basic scientific consensus has been that 1 or 2 degrees of warming would make small effects, which would be maybe not so easy to see against background of all the natural variability that we all know exists. But then as you get beyond that, those other effects become stronger. And those a lot of the physical effects, I would say, are a little bit less well known, well understood than the basic idea that it's going to get warmer. But there are some basic principles, just like we have principles that say if you add CO2, it does certain things to radiation, and that warms up the Earth. If you do certain things, if you warm up the Earth, there's certain things that would tend to cause certain consequences. You're going to get hotter days. You're going to get the ice caps melting. You're going to get, for a variety of reasons, this kind of more souped up water cycle where it doesn't rain for a longer period of time, gives you a drought, and then when it does rain, it pours, so you get stronger storms. And those are all harder to measure because that varies a lot from year to year, and it's harder to say for sure, if you get 0.5 degrees warming from 20 years ago to now, is that causing enough change that you could see it?
So that begs the question, when do we raise the alarm, especially when things have not essentially panned out? And I'm going to use a reference that you posted even on your page. I remember one of the things we talked about, that storms get stronger. People used it right after the latest storm in I can't remember what the big one this year was called in Florida. Ian.
So yeah.
They use that as this climate change alarm, when in all reality, we just have more expensive property. We have more human life that's near the ocean front. But in terms of the power of the storms, it wasn't even ranked in the top 15. And a lot of the storms that were actually the most powerful had the lowest barometric pressure, had the strongest winds, were all before 50, 60 years ago. They were a long time ago. So there's no way to say that the increase in temperature had led to these stronger hurricanes or stronger typhoons. It literally did not add up.
So it's interesting. Often often I hear people criticizing kind of certainty on you'd say the alarmist side. This is going to happen. How do you really know that? And I think those are usually good criticisms because there's a lot of things we're unsure of. But I like to turn it around and say, if you're going to be a skeptic, you got to be skeptical on both sides. Okay, so maybe we don't know for sure how much stronger storms have gotten, but do you really know for sure that they're not stronger? And there's been a tremendous scientific debate just within the field about whether hurricanes have gotten stronger. And there were some papers a few years back where people that were, very, very well respected in the field were saying that they had very clear evidence that they were stronger. Others were saying that it looks like they're stronger, but the observational systems 30, 40 years ago weren't as good. And so you can't really say what the strongest storms were then. Since then, looking at kind of I would say the consensus. What's that?
What would be your belief on that then?
So I don't really know. I don't have the technical knowledge to have a strong opinion about it, but reading kind of the review articles that the experts have written on this particular corner of the field, it looks to me like there's kind of mounting evidence that they really have gotten stronger.
So give me some of the evidence, because to me, I'm going to be honest, I'll say it up front, I do believe climate change creates dollar bills for larger organizations. And so to me, pushing the fear of stronger storms, which based on the way that we do science and that we can research exact things in the past, I don't believe that all of a sudden things just, well, it doesn't match up because of the technology. I respectfully disagree with that. But I want to know what evidence they could provide that would really drive this. And if they're experts and it's the consensus, is there a driving factor? Are they funded by certain universities? Are they funded by different groups? Because to me, it doesn't make sense. So, what was the evidence that they presented that would convince somebody like me that thinks that it's full of garbage?
So there's a number of indices for how strong hurricanes are. You could look at there's an idea of energy dissipation, which is related to the cube of the top wind speed. If you double the wind speed in any wind speed, whether it's in a storm or not, if you double it, the amount of energy it deposits, into a building that it's blowing on, increases by a factor of 8. And then you also, if a hurricane lasts longer, then it's dissipating more energy than if it lasts a short time. So people have over the last 30, 40 years, I'd say there's been enough data that people can measure that. And I could try to find the paper for you, but I don't remember off the top of my head exactly. But it's that kind of thing. So if you say, well, there was a stronger storm, 50 years ago, that's exactly the same thing as someone saying, oh, there was a storm last week, must be climate change. And you could say, well, there's random variations, right?
Counterpunch to the argument that all storms are getting stronger because of climate change, because there's blanket statements used that the weather is strong. Yeah. We've never seen strong storms like this. There's never been more damage, which is accurate because, again, what I said earlier, structures are more expensive.
The damage is very misleading.
But when I counter it, talking about the fact that if I were to take all the storms, and I had the same data, I'm not going to bring it up now, but I had the data that showed in terms of barometric pressure, which again, you could say the instruments were different. I don't know how barometric pressure changes based on current instruments, and maybe you can enlighten me. But then you've got that mixed with the actual wind speed that was measured, which I don't know the technology has changed in terms of measuring wind speed. It wasn't like I'm pointing out one storm. It was literally saying that there has not been in the last 20 years a single storm in the top 5 strongest storms in the last 100 years. The storms have just ebbed and flowed. So it just doesn't make sense to me unless you find a specific way of viewing science. To me, it's a counterpunch. I'm not saying, well, look at these years. I'm saying it just disproves the argument that storms are factually stronger than they were before.
Yeah. So this is one of the things I like about arguing, in Facebook rather than arguing in a video, because, we're not going to pull up all the papers and look at them, as carefully as we would really need to tell if you're right or I'm right in this conversation. The papers I'm referring to I think they're both by Knudsen et al. With a K, in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, which is it's this kind of less technical publication of the AMS. They both came out within the last few years, and they both kind of look at the global statistics. And so what are you referring to? What article are you saying you saw this in?
When I looked at it, it was actual weather data that was from like national science organizations. It literally was just stating the actual strength of storms, is whatever article it was. I can't remember what it was from, but it was stating the levels, and it was organized not like a Wikipedia. It was a scientific data journal that just strict measurements, no recommendations at the end, not talking about climate change. It was literally just giving the raw data of the strength of storms, barometric pressure of the storms, wind speed of the storms, and how they ranked.
Yeah. But strong, but kind of pure data can be dangerous when you're trying to interpret it, because, for instance, if I've had these conversations with dozens of people, someone will say, I definitely have this proof. Look, it didn't get warmer, it got colder. Oh, well, you were looking at one part of the earth. You need to look at the whole earth to not cherry pick a result. Sure. So, I don't know exactly which data you were looking at, and was it looking at tropical cyclones all over the world, or was it just looking at the Atlantic, which has a lot of ups and downs?
It had typhoons, and it had hurricanes. It had every major storm in the last, since what they considered modern scientific history. I believe that was about 100 years-ish since they were able to actually measure.
Yeah. So, so, I can't, as I said, if any of your viewers want to look, I believe you look in Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, BAMS. I think this is from 2021, something like that. There's one article about projections of future hurricane strength and one about measurements of recent hurricane strength. And generally, what's that?
What's it called? BAM?
BAMS, yeah, Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, BAMS. AMS, American Meteorological Society. Yeah, and I could send you the link later if you want to put it, if you ever want to put it in the YouTube comments or something. But so I find this all these issues are complicated, and the hurricane one is tricky because seeing the data, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of year-to-year variability, so it's harder to see the trend. There's a little bit more clarity that when you take models that do a good job of reproducing what hurricanes look like now and give them conditions that are a few degrees warmer, the hurricanes get stronger. So the models seem to work at showing what stuff looks like now, and they indicate that they'll get stronger. And they also show that, half a degree of warming, you could just barely see the difference. So that's why they're arguing about it. If we get, God forbid, to, 5 degrees different or 8 degrees difference, then it'll be much more obvious, and then it'll be too late to do anything about it.
But a lot of these same experts, and the reason I wanted to go to the website is I'm trying to see who funds the AMS and these groups, which it looks like Lockheed Martin, which is, they're profiteers on war. So I think that's an interesting major corporate patron is Lockheed Martin. I think that's fascinating. And again, that's where I go down rabbit holes. And I think it's just interesting that that's something that needs to be looked at. But again, all these things have been deemed, a lot of these alarmist predictions like that, well, it could go up 5 degrees, but based on what we see, it just hasn't happened yet. None of it is.
Well, hold on. Is that really an extreme prediction? If you change the amount of CO2 a certain amount and it warms by a degree, and you then predict if you change it 3 times as much, it'll warm by 3 degrees. That doesn't seem like a very, big stretch to me.
Well, I just think we've been lied to so much about all the predictions before, while we're still on the climate change topic, I want to talk about Al Gore. Like Al Gore made oodles of money. He won an Academy Award, and that his philosophy became, and I was a liberal at the time. I was a Democrat watching that going, oh my God, what are we going to do to our planet? Like, we got to do something. And every single inch of that movie turned out to be false. Nothing has come to it. So yes, and to be clear, Barry, I believe climate change is happening. I think there's a lot of different causes. I think CO2 emissions might be one of them. I think it's scientifically, it's been shown that is one of the reasons. Again, you can look at it that way. You can look at the natural progression over time. Just like you said, there was an ice age, millions of years ago. Why did the same thing happen then? Were dinosaurs driving cars? No, it's just why has there been ebbs and flows this whole time? So then you can answer that. Okay, go ahead, and then I'll talk about Al Gore.
Yeah, so this is like, I hear this all the time, and it's kind of like saying, well, people got cancer before smoking, so why do you say smoking causes cancer? Well, different things can cause cancer. We know that the ice age, we know what caused the ice ages. We know that it happens on a 100,000-year cycle over the last million years or so. We know that it's related to some subtle changes in the Earth's orbit, which allows ice, basically snow, to accumulate in cold places during the summer. It doesn't go away during the summer. So each summer, each year you get a little bit more snow, and then that snow reflects more light, which makes it even colder. So that's a process that we don't totally understand, but we understand the contours of it, and we know that that's not responsible for the warming that we're seeing now. And if you look at the dinosaurs, we know that over time, again, we don't know all the things about how it works, but we know there's, over geological time scales, there's been changes in CO2 connected with actually CO2 gets over a year, the amount of CO2 that you get from a volcano is negligible, but over a million years, it could change the amount of CO2. And so over time, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere was a lot higher 50 million years ago, 100 million years ago, when there were dinosaurs ended 66 million years ago. We know that that was higher, and plausibly because of slow geological processes that aren't responsible for the rapid increase that we see now. So people, you're bringing up these things as if oh, gee, climate scientists should check about geology. We don't know any geology. Actually, the people that have been, now again, the popular press may say things that are wrong, but if you look at sort of the scientific consensus, which says, the warming we're seeing is almost certainly due to people, these questions that you're asking, and that I hear asked all the time, have kind of been answered. And so even raising them is kind of like a tell that, oh, there's some reading that you haven't done. I don't want to attack you, but there's some aspects of this problem that seem puzzling to you, but they're not puzzling if you look at the whole picture.
But I'm agreeing with you that I do think humans play a role in increasing increasing temperature. I just don't see the correlation to the ebbs and flows of the things that make everybody go crazy over it. And real quick, you brought up the false equivalent, in my opinion, of cancer. So, there was cancer previously, and now there's, cancer now. So how do, after smoking started, but that's science. So in the human body, we have cancer cells that exist at all times, but there's things that fire them and they create them to grow. Timing, stress, cigarettes, additives, all these things scientifically can say why cancer was there before and why it's massively increased, which is another alluding to the vaccine these days. Is there's a lot of these deaths happening that we could discuss. What was around COVID, long COVID, and vaccine? It's the same thing. So to use the equivalent of an esoteric time period of whenever the planet started, whenever we had an ice age, whenever the dinosaurs were extinct, and then to bring that in relation to cancer, I think is a little disingenuous because it's a completely false equivalent. And then I think it's interesting that you said dinosaurs died 66 million years ago. I'll probably agree with you. You've done probably more research, but the fact that we're questioning whether or not we could determine the wind strength of a storm maybe is not as accurate 70 years ago as it is now, but somehow we have the science and technology to know, as you believe, the dinosaurs died 66 million years ago. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is amazing. Yeah, I'm not a geologist, so I don't know as much about how they figure that out. I think that would be interesting to understand. But I've seen that the other way too, where I've had a lot of conversations with people where they're saying, well, we don't know if it's really gotten warmer because maybe they cited the weather stations near a parking lot and the albedo effect changed, and that maybe made it look like warming that wasn't really there. But I know the exact temperature it was in 1200 during the Middle Ages because I know it was warmer then. It's kind of the same problem.
You yourself said you don't know if it's gotten warmer. You just said in the last 30 years we know that it's gotten warmer, and we believe that has to do with people. But as you said, this is such a small sample size. Like if we can't tell the temperature, the actual degrees in the year 1,000 to 1,200, who's to say that we're just a blip on the radar? Are we able to actually analyze that data?
I'm a little bit skeptical about that. The best science now, if you look, there's a group called Pages. I forget what it stands for, but they had I think an article, I forget if it was in Science or Nature, one of the main journals, where they kind of did a consensus picture of what temperature had been like over the last 1,000 or 2,000 years. And, we know that it was getting colder in the 1600s and 1700s, and then got warmer, and then got much warmer in the last, especially in the last 50 years, last 100 years. I think there's a lot more uncertainty about that because it's all based on more indirect measurements if you go back more than about 150 years. So we don't really know, but the best, I would say, if you're gonna bet, I would say the bet is that it has been pretty constant for the last 1,000, 2,000 years. There's been fluctuations, but a lot of the biggest fluctuations people talk about are local. It could be getting warmer in Europe and getting colder, in a different part of the world. If you look at the average, it hasn't changed as much over the previous 1,000 years as it has in the last 50 to 100 years.
All right.
But I think I think there's less certainty about that.
I think there's less. I mean, that's the big thing is there's not certainty about any of it, and that's why I think the fact that we have, and I'm going to get into Al Gore now, his propaganda, and I'll call it propaganda, caused spending around the world to be, let's see, the global warming treaty that he put into place was $12.1 trillion or 484 billion a year because of his documentary. Yes, he made millions of dollars, got great speaking fees of $150,000 to speak wherever we want. But overall, he was a shill that ended up making the expenditures $12.1 trillion. That's why people think climate change and are skeptical is such big business. And he was not right about a single thing. What is your opinion? And I'm sure you saw it, as I think everybody did, on Al Gore's documentary that turned out to be complete hogwash.
So I haven't looked at his stuff for a while, but my recollection, so I can't remember the specifics. My recollection was that almost everything in it was absolutely correct. And I think that when I hear people talk about exaggerations that he said, often they're exaggerating what he said. The one that I think was the worst thing I remember was that he kind of implied maybe more certainty about how quickly the ice would melt. But we're seeing the ice melting. We're seeing the sea level rise. We're seeing probably looks like an acceleration of sea level rise. We're seeing a lot of sign of risk of very extreme sea level rise. So the kind of average projection is something like around 1 meter of sea level rise over the next century. But we can't really rule out several meters, which would put all of South Florida underwater, would have tremendous repercussions. So I mean, I would disagree that he said things that were grossly
Let me go ahead and
wrong. And
cover what he said.
What's that?
I'm going to give you the cheat sheet so you can see the things that did not happen out of some of the main points. He talked about rising sea levels. You covered that. You talked about the fact that might have been a little early. So it was inaccurate and misleading, which I do find it interesting that somebody like Obama, somebody like Al Gore, they own and since the movie purchased beachfront property. I feel like that's just odd if you're thinking that there's going to be this mass flooding on the whatever. Number two, increased tornadoes. That as of 2018, they had been declining in the time. The amount of tornadoes per year was declining from the time that he predicted these massive storms, superstorms. New ice age in Europe, he thought would happen, and I can't remember the exact time frame, but nothing has ever equated. South Sahara drying up, he said, in the next 10 years. Go ahead.
The ice age thing, I don't think he was pushing that, because that was something that really pissed. I mentioned Suki Manabe. The talk of an ice age really annoyed him because he did some of the work showing how a previous ice age might have been kind of kickstarted by some changes in the ocean, and but the circumstances that would do that now are different, so it probably wouldn't go the same way. So I think. A lot of times, if you look at what he actually wrote, and I'm not looking at the exact quotes, he might say, here's what's definitely going to happen, and there's a possibility that even this other thing could happen. So, he's throwing out all the worst case scenarios. And I think that's appropriate because,
I think that's,
what's that?
That's gentle. I would say that it's a gentle assessment of a movie that literally it wasn't providing it could happen. It was saying it will happen. I'm pretty certain from remembering that movie that it wasn't hey, we got to be careful.
Yeah, well, maybe we should do a Mystery Theater 2000 viewing where we watch it and we both comment on it. But, yeah, I do remember. I mean, Al Gore spoke at AGU, the American Geophysical Union, and I couldn't get into the room because everybody wanted to go. And
of course, because it sells. It's sex sells, drama sells. That's why
no, because people get pissed off when even stuff that is kind of supporting the idea that what we do is important. If it's grossly wrong, scientists get pissed off. I mean, as I said, Manabe did some of the seminal work in showing how changing ocean's current, and this is something I've worked on too, changing ocean current could cause an ice age, but it pissed him off when they said it's going to happen now because he didn't think that was true. you know. So
it's all a debate. That's the thing. It's
you're
all a conversation.
some things are more debatable and some things are less debatable. I think there's broad agreement in the scientific community that's going to get warmer. There's
Agreed.
basically broad agreement it could get a lot warmer if we don't change course. And there's broad agreement that there's a lot of kind of plausible possibilities based on physics we understand pretty well. When the air gets warmer, it can hold more moisture and you could have stronger rainstorms, and that would explain stronger hurricanes. There's a bunch of things like that. So, I mean, I think there's when you start talking about how it affects people, it does get trickier. But, I think that the basic idea that there's at least enough understanding to say there's a small risk of really terrible things happening and a big risk of a lot of moderately terrible things happening, here and there. I mean, if one extra city gets clobbered a year by a hurricane, it's not going to end civilization. We could handle it. But for the people in that city, it's one extra disaster that didn't have to happen. I think there's a lot of things.
How many things would have to change to control it? And that would be my kind of final point talking about the Paris Climate Accord. So save that question because I just want to go through. I have to finish them. Polar bears would become extinct. They've actually increased since 2008, I think, or 2006 when the movie came out. Temperature increases due to CO2. In the 18 years between 2000 and 2018, there was no significant rising. Like you said, there's been small, but nothing significant. Would be a wide range of terminology. I don't think a fraction of the degree would be.
No, if you look at you said you looked at my website. If you look at my website, there's a graph of the temperature, and you could see a very strong upward trend, and it did plateau. If you start measuring in 1998, which was one of the strongest El Niños, which is natural variability, which makes it warmer for that year. If you start then and then end, when you're looking at 2012 or something, it looks like it's flat. But then if you look at 2020, it's much warmer than it was, because there's like an upward trend, and then there's a bunch of oscillations, on top of that. So when you look at what actually happens, it doesn't necessarily just go up. It could go up and then down a little bit and then up more. But if you kind of look over the several decades, the trend is very clear. So, so to say that Al Gore predicted it would get warmer and then it didn't, and he's full of shit, is just incorrect.
Katrina was supposed to be foreshadowed. And actually the 10 years after Katrina, there was not a single F3 hurricane, which I double checked. There was not in those 10 years. We've had some strong ones in the last couple, of course.
You mean not F3? F3 is tornadoes. You mean the Saffir-Simpson category 3? Yeah,
category 3. I don't know why I said F3. Sorry. To make landfall, that is. The Earth would be a true planetary emergency within a decade unless drastic action is taken, which we've got more cars, more greenhouse gases. Again, we're trying to regulate them more, but it hasn't actually done anything yet. There's been no major changes. So none of these things truly happen. So, all right, let's go to Paris. Okay, you said a couple of them happen. I want to be fair to what you said. Overall, he's not batting very well. He would not be in the major leagues in baseball. So talk about the Paris Climate Accord, because again, the big issue is, okay, so what's the point? Why are we making all these climate predictions in order to create change? So Paris Climate Accord is there to fix the problem, which Trump got out of, which was one of the first things he did, and one of I think the best things that he did, because it put us at a major disadvantage. You talk about, a hurricane could wipe out a Louisiana and how terrible that would be. But again, it's just one storm. So why does that matter? Well, it sucks for that town. Well, who's to say that if we abided by the Paris Climate Accord, where we were the leader of the free world and doing things before other countries, while India and China, according to this Paris Climate Accord, still the one that Joe Biden signed us back into, they're able to go free into whatever they want for the 5 to 10 years, I think, of the gap between where we said we would make the change in the treaty, in the agreement, and when they would. So yes, maybe Louisiana gets hit by a massive hurricane, but at the same time, America becomes beholden to a country like China or like India or something that does not have the same free reign. And last thing on that, we don't even make up much of the greenhouse gases. China, India, that region makes up the bulk of them. United States, UK, we're less than 10% combined. And if we did something, would it really even make a difference? So the question becomes, what is the purpose of the Paris Climate Accord? Is that something that you really believe in, or what do you think we should actually do? This is our last topic on climate change.
So if you look at the per capita emissions, the US is one of the top ones. We're about double what China is. So a Chinese guy on average is doing half as much as the US. China, of course, even now is much poorer than the US.
Correct, which I was going to say.
So it seems like so I guess the first thing is, if you see temperature going up and it keeps going up, you're going to have, people roasting basically, and you're going to have stronger storms and some other flooding along the coast and some other problems that are, will affect billions of people and, do much more than $400 billion worth of damage every year to the global economy. Then you want to change direction. So, and we know that we now have the technology, and it's become very easy. I mean, 20 years ago, it was a big sacrifice to put solar panels up or get an electric car. I have solar panels. I'm saving money on it.
Agree.
I mean, it's like you have to pay more to pollute now. So the things that the Paris Agreement are, nudging people to do are not that painful. It would have been more painful, before we advanced the technology. We've been advancing the technology. It's gotten easier. So who should go? So who should go first? Should the guys that are three times as rich and emitting twice as much per person, or should the guys that are, poorer and emitting less? Should the guys that have been emitting a lot for, 100 years, or the guys that just started emitting, in the last 20 years? India, by the way, is much smaller than the U.S. for emissions, I believe. I have the graph on my website. Let's see.
So you brought up electric cars, and I drive a Tesla and a hybrid. I have a 2014 Tesla, so I like my electric cars. But at the same time, there's no way for me to stand behind the concept that those are friendly from a environmental standpoint. The actual mining of lithium is horrific. I'm with you on solar panels. They're great, and you can make money off of them. Electric cars are a little bit more expensive. I don't think they save the amount of money in terms of gasoline. I think it's always interesting when we see gas prices go up, especially during administration changes. But from an environmental standpoint, as a scientist like you are, how can you stand behind lithium being a true beacon in the world of environmental positivity? In all reality, hydrogen, maybe all that technology has been squashed by federal government, but we're on lithium, which is disgusting what they do in other countries to mine it. The slavery in terms of mining it, and it produces the CO2 emissions in production that most cars don't even produce in a lifetime from gasoline.
Yeah, I looked into that. I don't know about the mining, but I know that the production of the batteries causes much less than lifetime emissions from a car. You could look at my website, but what's that? The lifetime emissions from a gas-powered car due to burning gas is much greater than the greenhouse gas emissions from making an electric car. Again, I haven't looked as closely at the mining part. I saw some stuff that suggested it also didn't add that much. I think there are local very bad things that you're talking about. I think the slavery, the difference between slavery in mining and in the problems with fossil fuels is that changing the atmosphere and changing climate is intrinsic to burning fossil fuels. There's no way to burn oil without putting CO2 into the atmosphere. But certainly there must be a way to mine any material we need without slave labor or child labor. So, I think the response to any of the local environmental or ethical problems with creating any of this stuff is to fix the local problems, not to dismiss the whole technology.
Which has nothing to do with the U.S., by the way. And if you look at, so I'll go back and double check my resources, but when it comes to actually mining, or when it comes to the production of the single cells on the battery, like a Tesla, everything that I've researched and it probably is less than a lifetime, but I think there's also other things to think about, including the fact that you plug it in. It's usually powered by coal. Coal is still the major refinery in the United States. It's a fraction. I used to work in electric vehicles, so I understand that part is a fraction, but the actual production of it, they're using gas powered vehicles to mine it that use thousands of gallons of gasoline per car battery. That's based on the research I've done. And somebody just said it in the comments. Last thing I was going to say, disposal of bad batteries. There's nothing. They cannot go anywhere. They literally cannot break down. It is just blocks and bricks. I think electric technology is cool. I think the fact that we have managed to stay away from these stuff like hydrogen is fitting to the climate change movement. And last thing I'll say, so Casey's my stat guy, so he was looking it up in the background. So Delhi, India, was the most polluted city in the world in 2022. So
yeah.
So
I kind of think of myself as a values voter. To me, climate change is a values question. And basically, we're doing something which is going to make places like India, which are hot to begin with and much poorer than we are, worse places to live. And, just like you don't, someone dumping into someone else's stream, they should be told to stop. We're doing something which is affecting India, Africa, the whole world. We have the means to stop, so that's what we should do. And I think that other countries as they become richer will also do the same thing, because it's in India's interest. Right now they're more interested in getting richer than they are in protecting the environment, but as they get richer, they'll become more interested in protecting the environment. They have their own reasons to not want global warming, because they're going to be hot as hell due to global warming. China is going to lose a lot of land. Shanghai is right at sea level, so they have their own reasons for not doing it too. So I think we're the worst offenders. We go first, and then they'll follow.
What would lead you to believe that as they become richer, they're going to put their foot on the gas or the brake pedal and stop doing what they're doing to become richer? In what world do you think that leadership in other countries, specifically China, India, what have you, but China, do you think at what point they would go, oh, we've made enough money, let's go ahead and tell our people that we're going to go ahead and limit all of these emissions, and we're going to follow what we told the United States? Barry, that is a pipe dream that I cannot in my right mind ever think would actually happen.
It's a natural evolution, which we're already seeing in China. Delhi is the most polluted city now. It used to be Chinese cities. They've cleaned them up because in 2005, it was more important to them to build up their industry. In 2020, it's more important to make it easier to breathe. And in 2050, it'll be more important to not change the climate.
They haven't cleaned up shit in China. They just got passed by New Delhi. China has not done anything. The only time that they cleared out industry was before the Olympics in 2012 or 2008, whenever they had it there, and they didn't want smog, and they literally cut down industry and stopped it for the 3 months so the people all over the world did not see the huge cloud over Beijing or whatever. I think it was Beijing. It's back now. They just so happen to get passed by New Delhi because of how much Delhi is now producing, which is hilarious to me, considering the fact that the United States is trying to be a leader, saying we got to get ahead of these other countries that are producing all the stuff that we buy on a daily basis. We can't get American-made products because they do it for cheaper. They do it for less because they're able to make big, big money, including their governments. I think it's a pipe dream thinking that in any way, shape, or form, they're all of a sudden going to go, we've done enough, let's stop. I don't get that rationale. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think that your priorities change as you go into a different income level. When everybody's dirt poor, you're just thinking about not getting dirt poor, and you're not worried about stuff down the pike as much. But when people aren't dirt poor anymore, and we saw it in Europe and the U.S. The U.S. had very polluted cities, and we got to a certain level and we cleaned up. I think we're seeing. I'm not as familiar with Chinese air quality information, so I'm pretty sure I've heard that they've gotten better, but I haven't done the research the way I have for other things. So
Casey,
I'd be interested in looking into that.
Casey's message said that they've gone down a bit, but he said it's also, I guess their population's been declining, which is true as well. So that's why they were passed by Delhi, is because Delhi's population is huge. India's population has been growing like massively. China spent 30 years telling their people that they couldn't have children if they were, whatever, one boy, two, whatever it is, all the laws.
No, it was front page news that their population went down 0.06% this year from last year. They were saying it's the first time it's gone down since the early 1960s. So I don't think that would explain much of the decrease. I mean, it's complicated because COVID also made a big change in everybody's, air pollution. But let's agree to look at this afterwards, because I'm really not sure, but I've heard that they've gotten better.
Fair. So we're already coming up on an hour, which is fine. We can go a little bit longer because I want to get into one other part, which is, of course, your opinions on the election. And we won't make this another hour. Let's go ahead and do about 20 minutes on it and just talk about. I know that the reason why we've been re-engaged about having this, you posted something about January 6th and how the disgusting XYZ stuff about the insurrection and the election issues. So give your ideas on the issues behind election deniers, the election, and January 6th. Whatever you want to talk about with it, I'll respond.
Yeah. So I posted something, I think, on the Facebook page of one of my other conservative Facebook friends, that I said, we've been yelling at each other, up till the election, but it's not going to be the end of the world, whichever thing happens. We're still going to be the United States, and we'll survive. We shouldn't exaggerate how big a difference it's going to make which person wins. And I was speaking to someone that totally hates Trump, but I said, realistically, there's things he did that I didn't like, but and there's the way he behaves I didn't like, but I didn't think he destroyed the U.S. in the 4 years that he was there. So, and separately, I also was telling people, nothing's going to happen. Trump's going to hopefully lose the election, leave, and then he'll make a second career saying he really won, and he'll attract, fans complaining about it, and that'll be the end of it. But there's no constituency for doing anything again anti-democratic among the Republican Party. Republicans have the same ideals Democrats have, that we have the rule of law, we have fair elections, we give everyone a fair shake, and we solve things peacefully.
Do you still think the Democrats believe in a rule of law?
Yeah.
Politicians, not Democrat voters, but do you think the Democratic politicians truly still believe in a rule of law, and why would you say yes? You already said yes. I just figured why would you say that?
Yeah. I guess their behavior seems consistent with that to me.
What kind of behavior? I'll help. The reason I say that is they've not all Democrats, but there is a percentage that have still continued to talk about defund the police. They're looking at police more as enemies than friends. And
defund the police does not go against the rule. So when I say the rule of law, I mean, like, if you have a law that you conduct an election, that whoever gets the most votes wins, then you don't say, well, if I didn't get the most votes, there must have been cheating, so therefore I should just win automatically.
It happened in 2016 when Hillary Clinton and many Democrats said that election was stolen from her, and it was Russian disinformation. The reason why Trump won the presidency. I mean, that was a bunch of Democrats, including voters, that were able to argue that statement for 4 years.
So I think that you have to be careful about what you lump together, because there's some things that rhetorically sound similar but are very different. So it's one thing to say, this election was stolen because my opponent lied and people believed the lies, versus saying, my opponent didn't really get the votes that he got, and someone went in and changed the votes, right? Those are two different kinds of, because my opponent lied and that, illegitimately convinced people of things. That's kind of normal. That's a normal accusation. Every election has probably had something where someone said the press coverage wasn't fair, and this thing happened which wasn't fair. But those are kind of the normal noise around elections. And I personally think that a lot of the stuff about the Russian influence was exaggerated by Democrats. I actually thought, it was one more thing among many things that was happening.
Why was the speech of conservatives that were fighting against the results of the 2020 election? I know you just made it seem like it's two completely different things, but I like to take away. I'll take away my issues with voting machines and ballot harvesting. I'll take that away for now, and we'll just talk about the suppression of information. And the fact is, this is an actual statistic by all forms of media. 87% of media is more of a left leaning. It's leftist. I want to say propaganda, but I'll keep it fair. Leftist messaging. So then you look at the fact that things like Hunter Biden's laptop is suppressed. So that falls more under the category of Hillary Clinton's, because even though one is being very, 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 very proven to be true, but and the other one was, like you said, probably overblown. So that on in and of itself, and I'll break down very basic numbers. If you look at Georgia, if you look at Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, they all in all would have been 21,000 votes across all of them, would have completely flipped the election if that would have mattered based on the Electoral College. So when they did post voting, that if the Hunter Biden story had come out, would that cause people to not vote or change their vote that voted for Joe Biden? It was astronomical how much that would have changed just in those states alone, which take away all the ballot harvesting, take away the 2,000 mules. That disinformation that was literally created by organizations being run by mostly Democrats, some rhinos at the same time, created a complete false election. I mean, that literally was enough to distinguish enough major change. It's very different than, well, he said, she said. All the media on one side, and then people like me can't even talk about it. For 4 years, people were allowed to talk about disinformation, and they were celebrated on media. I and many other conservative voices in terms of that sense are shut down, deplatformed, demonetized, and algorithmically squashed, and even told in some documents based on our federal government that we are considered terrorists in many ways. How is that equivalent, and how is that okay?
So I think if Trump had said what you just said, it would be an interesting argument to have. But that's not what he did. He said a bunch of people voted illegally in 2016. I know it's true because otherwise I would have, won the popular vote. He put together a committee to look into it. They never found anything, and that was kind of the end of it. Then he made the same accusations before the 2016 election. If I lose, it'll be because they're messing with the vote. And then when he lost, he said they're messing with the vote. And he then just went through all these ridiculous things, which had no evidence. His own attorney general said they were bullshit. And he said, based on that, we have to stop this election, turn it around. So that's different. So you're saying, so a reasonable person might have said it's really unfair that Twitter was against us and Democrats control too much of the media. Those are all also consistent with the rule of law. Someone controls the media. There's right-wing media, there's left-wing media. The problem is when you throw people in jail because of what they're writing, but that has not been happening. If Twitter makes a decision about how they want to monitor their stuff that you don't like, go on a different company. And this is kind of the conversation I always heard going the other way. The people on the left was saying, America, it's not a real democracy because corporations control everything. I think you could complain about those things and you could have your beefs with them. That's different than saying it's not a democracy.
I agree. But how is it that it is so focused on demonizing one side and not the other? And the difference is, yes, you can go to another platform. You can leave Twitter, which I think it's a perfect example of what's happening when Elon Musk, a private business owner that is a Democrat by nature, but is a free speech advocate, buys something and he's now demonized by all media. They're forcing him to be demonized just because he wants to open up the ability for people to have free speech. And you're talking about these social media information platforms we are being found completely colluding with federal government entities. That is not a democracy in any way, shape, or form. That actually, we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic, but that takes away the rights of a constitutional republic. It takes away the democracy that leads it, and it doesn't allow for there to be the conversations that we have. The reason why they don't happen amongst other people, we're lucky to be able to have this civilized conversation. Most people get so divided because of the way that they have been programmed by algorithms, by social media, and by the mainstream media to what they see. And I think that that is the biggest issue facing this country. And if you look at what's going on with the 2020 election, which I do believe was hot garbage on a lot of different levels, and I could talk anecdotally, all the way to information suppression, all the way to movies like 2000 Mules, which I do believe is accurate. And we can get into that too. But I think all of these issues make it a completely unfair discussion, especially when you talk about January 6th, where we were at the Capitol to simply have our voices heard, and it escalated. There was some negatives that day, but there's some really weird circumstances. We don't get to see 14,000 hours of footage, which I actually know what's on a lot of that stuff because I have a friend that was imprisoned and for parading. He's been in jail for 2 years for parading. It's a two-month sentence. And he's still got time left. There's all these issues. We've demonized one side of people. So no, we're not getting arrested. We're not getting arrested for writing. But we are getting arrested for having a different belief system. Those people that went in the Capitol, there's people that didn't go in the Capitol that simply posted on social media we got to do something about this, and they got close. And they've been actually imprisoned as well. There's some people that did do bad things that have been imprisoned. I get it. But for the most part, we have found a way to manipulate the data and the information on January 6th, pretend like the BLM riots of 2020 never happened, comparative to a day that caused a fraction of the violence, fraction of the danger, and not a single police officer was killed, even though they told you otherwise. Guy died of a stroke 3 days later. They've manipulated the information is all I'm saying, which has created division that is completely ridiculous.
Well, again, you're basically making criticisms of different viewpoints, which that's fine. But to me, the dangerous thing was when the president loses an election and says, I didn't really lose. There was cheating. The vote really went the other way, but they had some secret plan that made it go my way. I mean, if a president can do that, the democracy is done, right? Because any president could just stay in power.
Hillary Clinton had done the exact same thing, but we forgot about it because we didn't forget about it. We accepted it. We accepted it because the media looked into it. They gave it a fair journalistic shake. And even when the data was showing that it was complete bullshit, they continued to say, I feel like there's more to this. I feel like there's more to this. Oh, impeachment? Well, we can do it. We can spend the government dollars because we have the right numbers in Congress. So let's go for it. That was pushed as far as it can go. And then when we questioned and wanted an investigation, and sorry for filibustering, but they wanted an investigation that's why I was there to march with almost 1 million people is why don't we take a second? There's some really odd irregularities. We saw them on live TV with numbers swapped. There's all these different things. Polls did not match up. None of these things matched up. So we're saying, let's take a step and let's have a quick, let's figure this shit out. And they've now demonized.
Do you think that the former president's statements after the election were those of someone that was trying to take a step back and figure things out?
No, he wanted things he wanted to check on information. He wanted an investigation. You only have a month and a half. I don't think he had the time to go, wait a second, guys. He was the one that had to go, we need to investigate this now. Something is not right. Polls don't match up. You've got all of these issues with, I was watching live, and this would lead me as a sane human being to question things. The way things are fed into media is based on actual vote counts. That's the way the technology works. When you see something completely flipped in the middle of the night, when you're looking at 1 a.m., when you see a number go from here and go like that, which I was watching live, and I go, what the hell just happened? That's enough to go, that is very weird. When you have video.
It always does that. No, every election has things like that.
Okay, and I will say every election does have its issues. I'm not going to lie that
It's not issues. The votes being tallied in lumps, and then the numbers change. And
you're misunderstanding me. The numbers didn't just jump. One went down. Numbers should never go down, Barry. They shouldn't. They shouldn't swap. There should not be a flip. They're literally inserted in. And the last thing I'll say is then you've got footage of people that they've got camera footage of people pulling out briefcases when there's a random water leak. Like, again, I'm bringing up things back from 2020, but you've got a luggage full of votes in Georgia in the World Congress Center under a table, to which the people came out and they said, there's nothing wrong with this. The chain of custody was completely fine. That doesn't mean the chain of custody is fine based on election bylaws. That's not fine. You're not allowed to have unsupervised votes and people that are only on one side of the voting board feeding them into a machine at 2:00 in the morning. There's a lot of issues. Could it have not changed the election? Absolutely. But I think we deserve
those issues were all investigated by Republicans, and Republicans found that the accusations weren't true.
the
I thought the best line from the January 6th meeting was when Bill Barr, the Attorney General, who is the Attorney General Trump got to be more loyal after the previous Attorney General got fired or quit, I forget. He said, there was never a time when the president showed any indication of wanting to know what actually happened. He only wanted to know, what can we say to reverse the election? And looking at him from the outside, that's totally consistent with his behavior in that and in everything else. He was interested in winning. That's all that he was interested in. And to me, that shows that's like breaking the contract, right? Everybody could say it was unfair, and the other side said things that they shouldn't have said, and I would have won if not for the inflation that somebody else caused. All that is kind of business as usual. What's not business as usual is just saying, if I lose, someone cheated, I didn't really lose.
Well, I mean, we saw it coming. I mean that's part of it, and the fact that I can't even specifically say exactly how I feel on a video on social media channels, to me, is enough to go, well, that's pretty messed up. So then get it, and again, sometimes some of the investigations do take time, and that is just because Trump said things in a way you don't like doesn't mean, like, to some people, when you say we need to find a way to win, we don't know all the conversations going on besides that, meaning like something is not, they could have been saying something is not right. We have to check this. Why is this number not right? Why is this this is not playing? And then they come back and we have to find a way to win. And that's the soundbite that's of course taken and pushed on. And the other thing with this whole term is he had the media and he had Congress fighting against him with false impeachment. So they'd already been putting things into the mind of people. You take COVID. The whole bleach statement is mind-boggling. They took words, which they of course ignore a lot on Joe Biden. They take the words and they make a whole press campaign against him. He's so stupid. He's telling people to take bleach and kill people, when that was so far from the truth. It's mind-boggling and taken out of context. There were so many things that led to the misinformation of the American voter, and essentially, yes, I believe the movie. Did you ever see 2,000 Mules? Out of curiosity.
No.
So what is your, because it's been quote unquote debunked, which the way that they have debunked it is by saying it's debunked without ever saying why it was debunked. So what is your opinion on 2,000 Mules, which is pretty damning evidence to me, and it's mind-boggling that it hasn't gotten more traction in Congress?
I looked a little bit into one or two of the allegations in detail back in December, and they completely fell apart upon inspection. And after a couple of those, I decided, I don't have time to look through because every day there was someone was showing me some guy in Italy had a transmission that proved someone in Italy was changing the election machines or something. I can't look into everyone. To me, the interesting thing was that people that were supported by Trump, like the guys in Georgia, Republicans, Trump appointees, people in the Trump administration, were all saying, this is nuts. Like, this isn't just maybe it was cheating, maybe it isn't. It's kind of hard to say. They were saying these are totally crazy allegations, and I want nothing to do with this. So that to me is, I don't need to. If the Trump appointees are saying that, I don't need to look into it. I feel like that's enough for me.
We're trying to say that it's not about Republicans or Democrats. To me, there's an establishment, and then there's not, and I'm not part of the establishment, clearly. And I don't think, as much as I do believe Trump has some flaws, major flaws, and I do not want him to run again, even though I know that he is. There is an issue when you have, when you are just pushing one complete narrative on how he is actually just using his words. And I don't think that's a fair assessment. And that's what happened to the politicians that backed him. The reason why that you could not back Donald Trump is because you would be demolished in the media. It would affect your ability to run again. Granted, he did pretty good in terms of pushing some candidates to running in 2022 because it died down a little bit. But then they also didn't win. They didn't do great. We didn't do great in the midterms. So the reason why some had to back up, and I think Barr was a shill ever since the very beginning, is because they knew.
What did Barr do that made him look like a shill other than disagreeing about the election? Because it seemed like he agreed with Trump about everything else that I saw.
Him and Trump had not been getting along months leading up. I remember starting to read Barr's issues with Trump in when are we talking? We're talking well before the election. It was the summer. I would say August of 2020 is when they stopped because he was starting to have issues with some of the coronavirus response and some of the messaging regarding that. Barr and Trump stopped getting along about 4 months before the election, which would also explain why Barr was so like, all right, perfect. He's out. I'm out. We're good. Done. There's no, they were not getting along very close to the election.
So you think that because Barr did not like the way Trump was handling COVID, he felt it was legitimate that he should reject legitimate accusations of voter fraud.
Barr and him, there was more than just COVID. There was issues that Barr and him. I just remember that I knew before the election they weren't already getting along, and there was already speculation that he would be out, but it was too late in the presidency for them to get rid of him. And this was a good reminder by Pam. Let's not forget Barr, before the election even started, sat on the Hunter Biden laptop, which for the most part, all documents were showing now. They knew that it was true. So when
Barr's a pretty big guy. I think he would have broken it if he sat on it. No, sorry.
That is a good joke. That is a good joke.
Couldn't resist.
But in all reality, I mean, that's a fact. He sat on something that he knew. If he, before the whole election denier situation happened, he sat on one of the biggest pieces of data, the ultimate October surprise. He sat on it and didn't allow that to be given to the American people and actually supported its suppression. That tells you whose side he was actually on, does it not?
Or it tells you that the doubts about the laptop were widely shared.
No, they're not. That's beyond evidence right now. There is whistleblowers, there is FBI operatives, there is people that have spoken out saying that they knew that it was completely legitimate. The higher ups knew, but they did not want it to get out. That is, and if anybody's going to know, Barr is going to know what the actual documentation is. And all you have to do, if you're in that place of power, is look at the friggin' laptop, and they would know that it's not Russian disinformation.
So why would he want to sit in the laptop if he didn't have a legitimate reason to? Why would he want to suppress information that would help? He's definitely out of the job if Trump loses, right? He's not going to go into the Biden administration. So why would he want to work against his own administration?
Because that's what the powers in this, and this is where you're going to say, oh, tinfoil hat. Globalists did not want Trump to be a leader. Barr, a lot of times they don't want to spend. Maybe he doesn't like the way Trump is doing things. He might not like the guy. I never said that he was a perfect individual. He can go make money in private practice. He doesn't need to serve the country. He doesn't need to do any of that stuff. He doesn't care if he's involved. He didn't like Trump at that point because, I mean, I can't get in his head, but I don't think he cared about serving anymore. Like it's just I don't know what else to say. It's obvious that if you're sitting on something that big, you don't want to be working for that person anymore.
But it seems like you're taking a lot of evidence of bad behavior at the top and sort of dismissing and say, well, Hillary Clinton complained too, but you're taking like not that much evidence for people in his administration saying, well, he didn't like him, so he must have been cheating. I mean, Trump does not have a good record for truthfulness.
How so?
How so?
No, I mean, honestly, that's a common speaking point. And then when I ask people to say, what do you mean he wasn't truthful? And nobody can actually give me actual statements that weren't truthful.
He sent out his press secretary to say that he had the largest inauguration crowd when he clearly didn't. It's trivial. It was a trivial thing. It didn't even matter. He won the election. He was president. Didn't matter how big his crowd was, but he wanted people to believe that he had the biggest crowd. And it's funny. I've had people tell me, I don't believe CNN because they showed all those fake pictures of the big crowd. I've looked on the internet. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. Maybe you could show me one. I have not seen a single picture contradicting the pictures that were, in the mainstream media showing a bigger crowd at Trump's inauguration. I mean, it was in broad daylight in the Capitol. You just needed one picture, right? I mean, I saw pictures from the stage where you can't tell where the back of the crowd is. So, you know, it was a big crowd. That wasn't the argument. The argument was whether it was the largest. There's like, he was going out of his way to say something that wasn't true.
Let's see.
And I remember thinking, if he'll lie about that, he'll lie about anything. And he did.
So they're saying that is a lie. Again, I think that is an interesting pick. I asked for one piece of data. You did give me one, so I'm not going to fight you on it.
I'll give you a second one.
Go for it, because that one's a little like, well, it's big, it's the biggest, it's, you know, but that's not a something of danger. That is probably an ego move, which again, there's still some things that show how enormous it is, and maybe he was in that case. And sound like I'm a Trump apologizer. Maybe he just thought it was the biggest because he just wanted to say that, and it was a lot of friggin' people. But I'll give you that one, that can't be proven, and it's probably not factually correct. Obama's.
Yeah. So I thought it was interesting because, you know, politicians are always spinning things, but that seemed, you know, and there's things that people argue about that are kind of hard to prove, right? But that one was an easy one, right? It was right out in the open, and he still didn't mind lying about it. So, and I remember thinking that one doesn't matter, but if you lie about something that doesn't matter, what about something that does matter? And I think when it came to the election, he did. I'll give you one other example, which I mentioned before. He said, oh, well, I just lost because I lost the popular vote in 2016 because they got all these illegal aliens to vote, millions of illegal aliens. Now, if that was really true.
That's not a lie. That's an opinion. There's a huge difference. And it maybe he can't find the truth behind it. Maybe I think it's incorrect. I mean, there's a whole bunch, and I honestly,
that's a statement of fact. Either millions of illegal aliens voted for Hillary or not.
Can you prove it? Can you prove that they didn't?
Okay, so right. So it's an allegation. Is it true or is it false? Okay. So he was a president for 4 years. He had the opportunity to check, because if millions of aliens are voting for Democrats, that's pretty important to stop, right? I mean, as a Democrat, I would say we should stop that. That's not the way our system's supposed to work. Why wasn't there more investigation?
Why would he won? At the end of the day, he won, and he didn't need to. He didn't need to waste taxpayer dollars.
Come on, really? As long as you win, it's okay if the other side cheats. You wouldn't investigate it. If millions of people that aren't allowed to vote, you wouldn't look into that more.
And again, his statement is made out of speculation, which again, you could be correct. And maybe when he found it out, it was like, man, it's not worth it. Maybe it was only 100,000 instead of 1 million. Moving on, we're currently president. Let's not focus.
No, there was no evidence of any.
Well,
there's no evidence of 100,000.
I'm literally making a speculation of numbers. I'm saying that is not a proven false fact, because it was never saw through to the end. Where, like, Biden on a daily basis, like, lies about stuff. Like, that is I mean, he's lied about, we can go into his past. He's lied about his education. He's lied about the fact that he went to Black churches, Puerto Rican churches, all these different things. Did he ever attend one? Yeah, maybe it's an exaggeration to say that he was raised in them. You're going to talk about Biden saying that he was a valedictorian. He wasn't even the top third of he wasn't even the top 2/3 of his class. You can talk about the fact that, what else is there? But I mean, there's like on an hour by hour basis, we're coming up with issues with Joe Biden. So you're talking about these allegations with Trump, but again, you just said Trump's a liar. What did Trump lie about? You're talking about
he didn't say it's my, you know, maybe he didn't even say maybe a lot of aliens voted for the Democrats. I don't know. He said, I don't remember the exact quote, but he was very categorical. He said aliens voted for Hillary Clinton. So if you say something that you don't have any basis for saying it, isn't that a lie? I mean, I could say you go around, you know, you're a serial killer. I don't know that you're not a serial killer, but if I said it, I would be lying because I have no reason to believe it, right? You would say that was, you know, reprehensible behavior if I said, you know, Anthony Russo is a serial killer.
I have an answer to this. So I'm now reading the quote. So he was using what's the part of speech I'm looking for? An exaggeration, but it's something else. He was saying
a lie.
No, because it's so ridiculous, because he said 10 billion illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton. And then it became the bogus claim by Washington Post. It was literally a statement, not specific number, essentially saying millions and billions of people voted. That's called tongue in cheek. He was being tongue in cheek. So the reason there was, and there is no, he never did any investigation into it because he didn't seem to care. He won. So it's not like he started and didn't learn anything. He said, I won even with Hillary Clinton getting billions of jokes. So you have actually heard the media spin it into Donald Trump's bogus claim that millions of people voted illegally, when in fact, he said 10 billion illegal immigrants as a joke about what had happened. So you're taking a tongue-in-cheek statement and saying that it was a lie, when in all reality, this was just a joke and an exaggeration. Because the media has told you that Trump lied about that, when in fact, he did. I mean, you can look at all the alternative medias on that. It took me 2 seconds to find it, but again, if you go and look through, you'll see all these articles talking about the whole reason was because of all these illegal immigrants, when in all reality, it was a damn joke. And there's an article by Breitbart that back in Breitbart's got some issues now, but back in 2017 were pretty legitimate, saying that there is academia and research from Old Dominion University that a political science did by the name of Jesse Richmond that 6.4% of the 20 million non-citizens who reside in the United States of America voted in November's presidential election. They extrapolated these results into support for each presidential candidate, estimating that Clinton would have received 81% of support from non-citizens. And this is data done by academia. That's where you're from, academia. So I don't know.
The guy whose data he used said that he misused the data. I mean, it was. I think he was acting in good faith. That academic, I forget his name, but that was controversial to say the least.
Jesse Richmond.
Yeah, because when you're looking at rare events, you could sometimes get funny things. If three people just check the wrong box, and then you scale that up to the whole population of the country, you could generate really big numbers.
If somebody in academia says something like this, posts an article from the start, and the president makes this claim, would that make him lying? No, he's taking an expert's reasoning and statement and saying that, so that's not a lie in any way, shape, or form. Now, when he says a big number, that's him exaggerating and being tongue-in-cheek. That's not a lie.
Yeah, I can't. I have something on my blog, slownews.org, about this, but there's so many things on him. I look at Omar. I don't know. I never met her. I hear the way she talks about Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda has killed many Americans. She said, "You can hold your chest out. You can." When I think of Al Qaeda, I can hold my chest out. And apparently, there is no evidence that she ever said that.
So you're saying that's a?
But I'm just finding that on the way to trying to look for where's the?
So he lied about Omar saying she's proud to something about being a Muslim.
Yeah, that Al Qaeda made her proud. He was quoting a quote that didn't.
Did Ilhan Omar say that being a Muslim, or that Al Qaeda made her proud? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Let me ask you another question, because this is again kind of getting into the weeds, and we have to look at the exact thing that he said to really see if it was something that he meant to be tongue in cheek, or if he meant people to. I think meant people to believe him literally. I think a lot of things Trump says, he does it a little bit with a plausible deniability. If you're one kind of person, you'll think he's talking literally, but someone else could say, well, he was just joking about that. What do you think of his behavior? Let's assume for a minute, let's stipulate that he wasn't trying to cause a riot in the Capitol when he told people it was up to you to stop American democracy from being destroyed by the Democrats on that day. And if they didn't do it, you wouldn't have a country. Let's say he wanted people to do it peacefully. He mentioned go peacefully, and then it wasn't peaceful.
So you just kept saying that he was saying go peacefully. So
What I'm saying is, what do you think of his behavior when it became a riot?
well, I was there.
Like some people were fighting.
I was there, and that I'm so glad that I was, because I know even conservatives speak differently of the day. I was on the lawn. I was near the front of all of it, seeing a bunch of Americans literally sing the national anthem, literally chant pro-American statements. Was there some fighting that occurred? I can tell you that it happened after there was a peaceful crowd, and I was near the front of it. 10 people back when there was the fences, still some of the fences. And that violence started nothing to do with Donald Trump. That started with an order to give the outnumbered police officers, because they did not bring up enough police that day, which was a decision made by leadership in DC. Bowser, Trump already gave the go ahead. It's Trump's decision, technically, based on our Constitution, based on the rules. It's Trump's decision on whether or not to have extra National Guard. He ordered extra National Guard. He said, go ahead and bring them. Bowser and the heads, I can't remember, it's the head of the domestic something or other, which at that time, the acting leader of it is Nancy Pelosi, Bowser, the mayor, and one other position, I can't remember who it is. And they were the ones that actively held back, waiting for things to get worse. So you've got a lesser amount of Capitol Police than needed. And then they were ordered to start throwing flashbangs into the crowd, which fired right next to my head a couple times, when people were chanting pro-police statements, pro-America statements, pro-Donald Trump statements. And then they started firing rubber bullets, which therefore caused people to start to get enraged. And that led to some of the bad stuff. I had left at that point, and then I had not left. I had gone down the hill, and then I came back up to see more of what was going on, which was still a peaceful crowd, except for in a couple locations that definitely did not go well. And I'll admit that that was pretty embarrassing. But now we're also being told that there was all this death and carnage that day. Buddy of mine gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to somebody that had a heart attack. One of the people that died because a flashbang went off near his head. There was another person that same thing happened. A few other like mid-50s or 60-year-old gentlemen died because of flashbangs. They started. Go ahead.
So it was clearly getting out of hand. Why didn't my understanding is that many people close to Trump were telling him to go on TV and say, pull back, have the rally outside. Don't be smashing the windows of the Capitol. I mean, he was getting calls from, I think, Kevin McCarthy and others. And from what I could see, he was basically lobbying Congress while they were being attacked. Do you find anything inappropriate about that behavior?
I'm trying to look at the exact time, but he did tweet and he did say, we need to be peaceful. He had just also said at the end of his speech, everything he said was be peaceful. Standing up. I mean, take away.
He mentioned I think he said be peaceful once or twice in the middle of the speech.
Oh, no. He said peaceful multiple times. I've watched the speech in rerun. I was at the speech. He talked about making your voices heard, which is apparently translated to rioting, when you can look at other Democrat leaders like Maxine Waters, like
okay, but
so people to fight in the streets, and that's not deemed out of hand.
Right. So let's assume don't want to fight about that. Let's say he didn't say anything to make people violent, but they got violent. I mean, the windows got smashed in. Somebody was being violent. You can't say that was Nancy Pelosi, but whatever happened, things got out of hand. Eventually, he said, you guys should all leave, right? At like 5 o'clock. That was like 3 hours.
Earlier than that. It was far earlier than that.
4 o'clock. It was 2 or 3 hours.
2 or 3 hours after it all started. I think it takes some time to translate. And I got to go back to the Wayback Machine. Casey, if you could look up what the timestamp, if you're in the comments. Yeah, you are. If you can look up the timestamp of that tweet. So your statement is he just didn't tweet to calm down fast enough. Is that correct?
Yeah, people were saying he should go on TV and say, move away from the Capitol. And he didn't. He made one tweet.
Out of curiosity, would anybody at the Capitol have seen that video and say, "Oh, Trump's on TV right now, we should calm down"?
My understanding is that when he did go on TV at whatever time that was, people did see it and they said, "Hey, Trump's saying go back."
That was way later. That was super, super later. The TV thing was later. He had tweeted much earlier than that.
He had one tweet at the beginning when they were saying hang Mike Pence that basically said Mike Pence is, no good. I forget the exact what he said. And then he had two tweets that said like don't fight with the police or something. But then he went on TV after hours of and that neither of those tweets really seemed to do anything in terms of making people not fight with the police.
Nobody was looking at their Twitter. Nobody. Oh, by the way, everybody there, I can tell you, cell phones didn't work very well. People couldn't even text anybody around. So I can tell you, I couldn't communicate with my friends that were there, all in DC. There's a complete lockdown. So Trump tweeted at 2:38 in the afternoon. I think Ashley Babbitt was killed about a half hour before that. Things were broken in a little bit earlier. I left probably around 3. Had nothing to do with seeing Trump's tweet. It's my girlfriend and I will say we left because it got boring. Nothing was really going on. We didn't know that Ashley Babbitt, something had happened on the inside of the building, which is still ridiculous that a cop shot an unarmed woman and didn't even face any kind of trial whatsoever. And to people that I know that were in the room next to her, she was mad at somebody for breaking that window, and she was yelling at the police officers to do something, do their job, and she got shot, which I think is mind-boggling. And his tweet at 2:38 said, "Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement." This all happened within a 3-hour span. And his speech, people were already starting to do things at the Capitol before his speech was even done. So this is all speculate. Was it 10 minutes before he made the decision? Is he somebody that wanted to see exactly what was going on before he went on Twitter and said whatever it is? There's nothing that he said that would incite a riot during that speech.
But is there anything that he said that indicated would you say that there's anything about his actions that indicated that he actually was kind of happy about the riot?
No. How would you infer that?
Because I believe when Kevin McCarthy said, we're going to do something about these rioters, he said something like, they're more, loyal than you are.
Can you find that quote? And by the way,
I can't do it in real. I can't do it that quickly.
I would say that if there, and I would qualify that statement, was it the rioters or the protesters? Because I do believe the protesters, including myself, were more patriotic than McCarthy, Pence, except all of these people. Granted, I do think that, people show the footage of Josh Hawley running across the hall. They wanted to make this look like the greatest attack on our Capitol in history. So they scared the shit out of the people in that building. AOC, by the way, nowhere near that building, and says that her life is in danger. But the people that were in there, they were under the understanding that the Capitol was being attacked, when in all reality, far from it. You had a very small faction of angry people and lawbreakers that were doing something to that extent. But there was hundreds of thousands of Americans. If they wanted to take over that Capitol, we would have been able to do that. That wasn't anybody's intention, except for about 200, 300 really shitty people. And once they got into the building, they were literally picking up trash after those that were shittier protester rioters. The actual amount of damage done with all these people inside, which is over 1,000 is what my friend who was inside said. They called it, I think, $2 million worth of damage, which it's only because some of these items were priceless, and that's why it was so expensive to fix. For the most part, there was a lot of garbage. There was a lot of trash. People were taking pictures on the inside. People misconstrue it as this massive insurrection that nobody's been charged with armed insurrection out of all of the lawsuits. Not a single person got charged with armed insurrection.
So so basically your picture of what happened was that that Trump didn't make baseless accusations about the election. Nothing Trump did contributed to the riot, and Trump's behavior when the riot happened. And I'm not saying there was a legitimate protest and also a riot. That nothing he did during the riot indicated, a lack of interest in stopping it.
Well, you're gaslighting the whole topic by saying, well, he made baseless claims about the election. Again, I still think there's a much bigger.
No, you're saying he didn't. You're saying he didn't make baseless claims.
No, I'm
Is that
saying
what you're saying?
he made claims about the election, and he said, let's have our voices heard. I don't believe the results. And I still, to this day, think that there are some major issues with the results. And I can tell you, and we're changing the subject back to that, but anecdotally, we have a decent amount of followers at the time, especially when Cash Lee Kelly was still around before he had to go to jail for this. And I had in the neighborhood, but not including his numbers, but about 100 people reach out to me that when they were able, based on their state and their municipality, check their ballot, showed that they did not vote. Some of the mail-ins did not go in, and some of the in-persons showed that they voted by mail. So there was some, when you're telling me out of 20,000 followers and at the time, and maybe 2,000, 3,000 people that see my stuff, that we have that high of a percentage of Republican voters that did not have their voices heard or something was fishy about it, that's enough for me to go, something's wrong here. So that's my statement to the baseless claims about election issues. Now, when it comes to what you're saying, did he incite a riot in any way, shape, or form? If you think that
No, I said, do you think that there's anything about his behavior when the riot happened that indicated, a lack of interest in stopping it?
no, because again, I don't think anybody that was on the outside knew, because as I can tell you, I didn't know how bad it was, and I was right in the front. I didn't know, because I knew that my buddy was inside. He told me that people were just taking selfies on the inside of the Capitol. There was one window that was broken into, actually two, right next to each other. And then the doors were open, which, by the way, those are magnetic doors, Barry. Super weird that that's never been discussed. And if you actually watch some of the 14,000 hours.
I mean, I was watching on TV just like apparently Trump was, and it looked terrible. I've seen protests at DC from, I live around here. I've seen protests at DC plenty of times. Nothing like that. Nothing. It looked like it it looked like a scene out of Les Mis or something. I mean, I realized people weren't shooting each other, but it looked crazy from outside. And, and Trump saw it because I saw it.
Behavior became riotous. Absolutely no doubt. The behavior at two windows, and anybody that can take a step back from the situation, and as somebody that was there can tell you that they used footage to make it look like the worst attack and assault on our democracy in history. Now they can use this forever to tell people like you and to say, this is like another 9/11. How is it another 9/11? How is it anywhere comparison? And yes, was he maybe watching going, this is escalating? Is it going to stop? Is there enough National Guard people? Is there something that can be done? What should I do? TV, I think TV would be a stupid idea, which he didn't go on until later. What do I tweet? What do I do? What do I say? And in all reality, I think he handled it just fine. Could he have done it maybe an hour earlier? Yeah. Do I think that would have had any effect whatsoever? Actually, probably not. And in the end, it actually did a disservice to people that didn't believe in the election, because then once the chambers were cleared and they came back, nobody could protest the election anymore, and they had to push it through, which is, again, the reason why I say it seemed like the biggest setup in history, that they're able to use this day against every patriotic-minded conservative to say, this is your ilk, this is your people. And on that day, they were able to use it in the fact that they could no longer not certify the election, which was already happening in Arizona. I remember the crowd when we found out that Arizona did not certify the results. Everybody went crazy because they were like, all right, by not certifying, we're not negating the election. We're saying we need a cooling off period. We need time in order to make sure that this is properly investigated, which it never was actually done. It's done by private investors like the Lindells of the world, the Lloyd Brunsons of the world. They're doing this on their own instead of the federal government doing their due diligence and going, there is enough issue with what's going on to investigate it. But they didn't want that to happen. And in the end, people won, because this trap ended up leading people into the assumption that it was the worst day in history, where we can completely ignore the billions of dollars of damage in the 2020 summers that were incited by Democrat politicians like Maxine Waters, Chuck Schumer, and the whole AOC, that literally told people to take to the streets, get in people's faces, get aggressive. They were saying these things and never were shamed for it. People couldn't eat dinner outside. There was buildings burning down. There was federal buildings in different states, not the Capitol in DC, but federal buildings being burnt down. Police officers actually being killed. Other individuals actually being killed at the hands of each other, black on black, white on black, black on white. I mean, it was terrible. And to us, we're saying the biggest assault on our democracy is a one-day span where doors were opened from the inside and where not enough police officers were ordered in, and Trump still at 2:38 in the afternoon, about 3 hours since he got done with the speech, about 2.5 hours, when he got done with his speech, still made a statement to be peaceful and then made another statement to cooperate.
So you don't think that Trump was trying to reverse the election based on unsubstantiated claims, a boisterous crowd breaking into the Capitol, and he had efforts to try to get people in the states to overturn the results that their state gave.
So, in the end, what would inciting violence and people going in the Capitol, as we saw what happened, how would that actually help him overturn the election when there was already states talking about decertifying their state results, including Arizona? How would that have been his master plan?
By not certifying the election, by having the vice president not, I don't know what the technical word is, but not certifying the election that day, it gave the states more time to reverse their elections.
Yeah, well, it's not to reverse, it's to investigate. That's decertifying does not reverse the election. It gives 10 days to learn more about any of the election fraud claims.
Right, but he wasn't. But right, so you're I guess we just are interpreting what we're seeing different. But I interpret everything in Trump's behavior as just making claims that he lost, and you should reverse them, whether or not they were true.
Well, that's speculation. And as we said, there's other issues on top of the voting machines, 2,000 mules. Again, you didn't debunk it. You just said that it just doesn't count. There's issues with ballot harvesting. There's issues with illegal voting. There's issues with numbers flipping. There's a bunch of stuff that he just want investigated. He never said, he did say, I want to overturn the results of the election, but he never said anything past, we need to stop the certification so that we can have a proper investigation. That's what he was alluding to, is what I should say. He called for the VP, as Casey just said. He said it before. He called for the VP to investigate for 10 days. That's why he wanted Pence to stop the process. None of what he was saying would immediately flip. He thought that it would work to flip the election because with proper congressional investigation, then they could see some of these egregious irregularities, which we never got to see properly. And when you do a recount in a place like Georgia, people don't know this about, and you may not know this about the ballots in Georgia, but once they are fielded and turned in, there was no way they could overturn Georgia because the names are ripped off. That's how they do it. When they count them, they're completely anonymous. So there's no way to even check voter rolls. It's a perfect storm of questions. So maybe that would have never been done. No, it would have been never overturned, but there was enough questions that we wanted 10 days. That's why I marched to the Capitol. That's why a lot of people that day marched to the Capitol. And that's why Trump said we need to make our voices heard peacefully. And in the end, that riot cost him the ability to have that 10-day investigation. And still, people like you that have I'm loving this conversation, are under the impression that this is the worst day in the history of our country and that anybody that was there is this horrible insurrectionist and they tried taking over the Capitol. And as somebody there, I am telling you that that is the most bullshit spin on the day, not by any means of you, but by what you have been told to say and told to hear and told to repeat, that it boils my blood as somebody that was firsthand experience as close to the front as you could possibly be legally, and got questioned by the FBI by being there because I had an organization called Be the Change, and seeing the January 6th Commission spend millions of tax dollars and essentially paint narratives that nobody is challenging because they managed to put on their committee all anti-Trumpers, including the Republicans, were anti-Trump. It makes zero sense to this horrible day. Was it a bad day? I will give you it's a bad day. And that's about where I can leave it.
And you say now that you think Trump maybe isn't the best man for the job. Did you feel that before this election, or just
2020?
Just recently?
What are you talking about? Before 2022 election or 2020? Yeah. I've been saying that for a while. I don't like his stance on vaccines. I don't like how he is. I mean, I don't believe as though he would be pro-mandate in any way, shape, or form. But he brags about Operation Warp Speed without completely ignoring the data that it's not effective.
If he had a better position in your view on vaccines, would you have felt he was? Because it seems to me that he kind of presided over, like you're saying, it's exaggerated, but to me it was a pretty traumatic event. I mean, it wasn't murderous the way 9/11 was, of course, but it was kind of an open threat to me, against how the democratic process works in a way that we've never seen before, right? Where you have people, okay, maybe only a few broke the windows and only a few people fought with police. Seemed like a lot of police were injured, whether their, death days later was caused by that or not, I don't know. But
it was factually proven by and again, this is the misinformation that made it seem worse than it really was. That cop got hit with a fire hydrant in the mix. Zero action. He went to the hospital to be checked, completely fine, died of a completely unrelated stroke 3 days later, and they made it seem like he was murdered at the Capitol. And that was, every medical examiner has come out and said that wasn't correct. He died completely unrelated. They're saying that police officers committed suicide because of the event, ignoring the massive rise in suicide after the 2020 riots that happened all year. The disrespect of police. It's such a curveball misinformation. It boggles my mind. So, what was your question out of that? What were you asking me?
Do you feel that the way the 2020 election ended with people battling the cops on the stairs of the Capitol, Trump saying he won, he was cheated. Do you think any of that, showed Trump to not be a good person to lead the country again?
I don't. That's not my reasoning. My reasoning is more about the fact that I think he's getting too old. I don't want somebody starting their presidency, I believe, at 78 or 79 years old. I do think he is not electable from a standpoint of we need somebody that can. And I don't think he's divisive, but I think if you take his sound bites, he's easily manipulated into being divisive. He never once, like Biden did, talk about how horrific Democrat voters are. He talked about politicians. He talked about the swamp. Biden talks about half the country. He deems me, and that's why I never thought I would say this. I don't claim him as my president, unfortunately, because he doesn't claim me as a law-abiding citizen. So I think some of Trump's rhetoric gets taken so out of context and it's easily manipulated because that's just the way he talks. And I think that's unfortunate. And to me, the greater battle is the fact that we have to, at this point, get Democrat leadership out of this country. And we have to get shitty Republican leadership out of this country as well. So that's why I don't want him to run again, is because I think that he'll be easily manipulated in terms of the way it sounds. And I think that it could lead to a Gavin Newsom winning the presidency. It could lead to I don't think Kamala can win. They're whatever. But it'll lead to something that I don't want. And I just think that he is too old. I don't like his ties to big pharmaceutical powers. And that is my main reason why I don't like him. The way he handled the election, I don't think he did a good job because we lost. We lost not lost the election. We lost the ability to have our voices heard because of everything that happened that day. And again, it did get worse when the two windows got broken. Absolutely. They didn't have enough National Guard there. And then let's wonder why the doors were opened up on the inside by a magnetic lock. That's super weird to me. So it was the biggest bear trap in history. And
we're looking at it. So, we kind of talked about this with global warming, right? So there's levels of certainty. How certain are you that Trump didn't do anything wrong? Like, are you sure that, he was not hoping that the riot would convince Republicans to vote the way he wanted? And so he was
voting
hoping to instrumentalize violence, but whether or not and do you think it's possible that he did think it was that his rhetoric would cause a riot? So I'm saying maybe not. Maybe it did and maybe it didn't. Is it possible that
it's possible that anything could cause anything? And I think that the fact that he ordered National Guard early to make sure that it was protected shows that he was being assertive and thinking forward thinking to make sure that did not happen. And his questions and demands were not met by those that set the biggest bear trap in the world. And I don't think in any mind did he think that if he led a mounted insurrection, that it would help him win the presidency. I don't think so at all. And again, am I 100% sure? Absolutely not. I can't speak in absolutes. I'm not.
How about 90%?
Oh, absolutely 90%. And okay. I always say if you think you're 100% right, then you're probably the person that's 100% wrong. But it's purely speculation on that. But the rhetoric does not match what you think he was doing.
Well, maybe that's a good place to leave it. I think we've had twice as long conversations we planned, but it's been very, I think it's been kind of fruitful. We both were able to talk, you know, uh, I
Peacefully.
think reasonably with each other, even though we disagree pretty. I think we may not disagree so strongly about everything with global warming. I think maybe we're further apart when it comes to January 6th, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this on your show.
Absolutely. What's your website? People have asked, and I keep forgetting to ask. Where do people find? Is it your
So
website?
two places to find me if you're just interested in the science stuff. It's just Google Barry Klinger at GMU, George Mason University, and that's the easiest way to find it. And if you want to see my political musings for what they're worth, that's slownews.org.
Oh, SLOW.
It's sorry, SLOW dash news. Slow news without the dash was taken. Slow-news.org, where it says today's news. I'm still figuring out what happened last year.
So is that what do you say? We're still figuring out what happened last year? Is that the top of the page?
Like the idea is I'm not, the newspaper talks about what happened today. I'm trying to figure out like what's generally happening. That's kind of the philosophy.
I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slow-news.org.
And you actually formulate a lot of really good research. And I shouldn't say you do formulate a lot of good research. It's got a lot of stuff. And we've even argued some of the research you've done. I've looked at your graphs and been like, but how do we argue interpretations of it? And I think that's actually science. Yeah. It's arguing interpretation. Yeah. Anyways, I've enjoyed it. I people in the comments, I saw a couple negatives, but for the most part, great conversations. Someone willing to talk. Casey, my info guy, with helping with a little bit of stuff. Good conversation. So I appreciate you. And it shows why you're willing to come on a show like this, because again, there's certain things on climate change you know better than me. I went to friggin' art school, Barry. Like, this is all self-research. People are always like, you can't do you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist. In all reality, all of us, just like Barry, your specialty is ocean related, but you do climate research. You also do research on other stuff. I think pigeonholing people that we can't research things outside of our field is silly, because there's a lot of really intelligent people out there that are able to have a conversation about a wide range of topics. And I thank you for being a part of Blunt Force discussion coming on. And maybe one day we'll do a conversation on vaccines. Are you as a preview, are you a big pro COVID vaccine guy?
I looked quite a bit at the COVID, fatality statistics. The vaccine seems like a harder topic. Like, I feel like it's, you need more expertise than I have and more time than I have to look into it. So I think I'm more willing to just go along with the mainstream positions and believe them. I feel like I haven't seen a reason not to, but I don't want to start a conversation about that now. But I don't think I have anything special to add about the vaccinations.
I got a 2-hour drive, so it's okay. We're good ending it now. So thank you again, Barry. Make sure you check out his website, slow-news.org. Are you okay with people following you on Facebook and mixing it up?
Fine. Yeah.
Okay, follow Barry Klinger, and always be peaceful. I get to have more of these conversations if we have good conversations like this. So thank you very much, Barry. Have a fantastic evening, and catch you on the flip side.
Thank you. See you later.
Take it easy. Deuces, guys. Check out awakenotwokestore.com. Awake for 15% off of all of our merch. One of our sponsors, I forgot to mention in the very beginning. Check out, where am I? First, I said that one, the merchandise. And of course, the one that you guys always like to patronize the most, thedrartishshow.com. Use BFD at checkout for 10% off. He's got a lot of stuff for wellness, health, Doc's Viral Defense. Great to avoid if you've got, if you're around a bunch of people with the COVID, whatever you want to call it, whatever, C19. Go ahead and check that out. He's got Doc's Viral Defense, vitamin C, selenium, all the different supplements that keep you healthy with no matter what variant. And lastly, my personal favorite, the Prostate Health, Prostate Pro, because I don't like waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to pee, and it helps when I take it. When I don't, not so great. God bless, guys. Have a great evening. And remember to enjoy and share Blunt Force discussion.